Welcome to Good for Bitcoin, a weekly show recorded live every Friday, where we recap the top events of the week and talk about everything that is good for Bitcoin. If it's built on Bitcoin, then it's good for Bitcoin. Let's get started.
Content shared on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute financial, investment, or legal advice. The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, or company. We encourage you to conduct your own research and consult with a qualified professional before making any financial decisions.
Well, GM everybody, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Good for Bitcoin, a weekly show we do every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Really thankful to everybody that has tuned in. Just to shout out some folks in the audience. We see Kabi down there. I see Blaze. We see Matei. We got Rocky, Annie. Thank you guys for tuning in so consistently every week. We really appreciate it. Want to introduce a couple people who are hosting the show today. First, we have Sean, who is behind the leather handle. And Sean, happy Friday, sir.
GM, Brandon. Happy Friday.
Yeah, and if you missed the announcement, we have somebody new who has joined Leather. We have Kate, who is our new community lead. And Kate, welcome to Good for Bitcoin.
GM. Really excited to be part of this first one.
Yay. So it was a big week, of course, just with Kate joining, but also just in general Bitcoin news. We have a lot to get into. Of course, I feel like this week has been a little quieter, I would say, a little slower, just with a lot of folks traveling in Korea for Korea Blockchain Week that was going on. We all, the three of us, were watching, I guess, on social, and we're not in attendance, but there was a lot of really fun things that were happening on the Leather side as well. We were sponsoring the Bitcoin Bar with Trevor Owens and the Pizza Ninjas. We changed our PFP to a ninja-inspired leather logo, which was really fun. And we had a really fun, 3 days of sponsoring brunch and their after party, I believe, as well. We also ended up sponsoring with the guys at Bitflow. So really cool. Looked like a ton of fun. It was also just really fun on our end to create a lot of the assets for it that you saw, like our ninja-inspired PFP on Leather, and a lot of other really fun things. So definitely feeling the FOMO. I'm curious, Sean, on your end, what events that you saw that were happening over there, maybe anything that caught your eye, any announcements that were particularly interesting, or any speeches or any takeaways, I guess, from the festivities this week.
It's been pretty off my radar. I haven't been super plugged in. I've been a little bit more off the computer this week. So as far as Korea Blockchain Week, I don't know. Your news is as good as mine.
Yeah, I guess that's fair, and it probably is a good week to be touching grass. Well, every week is a good week to be touching grass, but I would agree. I feel like there hasn't been a ton of actual news coming out, but just another sort of collective, for people to just meet in person, and of course we did a lot of that when we were in Nashville, but the conferences continue, and in a couple of weeks. Singapore is coming up right around the corner, and our team is planning some stuff there as well. So we are just in the thick of conference season right now.
Well, to your point, though, about maybe it's less obvious and less visible on socials, the connections that are happening in person, the presentations and conferences that people see, those conversations, that's impactful. So it might not be as obvious right away, but down the line, we see the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's a reminder of how much of a time zone difference it is. I mean, we, experience it between, me and you being in pretty different time zones, but Asia is just an entirely different beast. Like it's Saturday over there, right? Already. And it's just a pretty big time difference. So whenever I was trying to schedule out posts that would align with Korea time zones, it's just always kind of interesting to good reminder, I guess, that, time zones exist, and they make a pretty big difference, I guess, when it comes to engaging with people online on social.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin time zone.
That's right. Yeah, Bitcoin doesn't sleep.
That's right. Hey, I'm pinning some of the tweets that you have lined up in the doc. So one, to welcome Kate.
Yeah. So Kate, I would love, we posted and kind of introduced you on Leather Lounge yesterday, but would love for you to maybe reintroduce yourself to the crowd here and maybe talk a little bit about what you'll be working on at Leather.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, so if you missed it, I'm Kate. I'm going to be the new community lead for Leather. I've been a Bitcoiner myself for about 5-6 years now. Mostly I've been having fun, growing communities and using that to build some really cool products for Bitcoiners. And that's how I found Trust Machines. I was looking for different ways to actually use my own Bitcoin. And I kind of landed upon this little ecosystem here. And I was just so intrigued and it just like kind of all fell into place. So I'm really excited. I think some of the first things I'll be doing is you probably have heard of Leather Mobile. I'm going to be, looking for some key players from or like some key insiders from our community to really help us, give us some good insights on that. Maybe a little beta tester program. You'll probably be able to help shape the final product and try some features before that goes to a bigger audience. So that's going to be pretty fun. From there, we're just going to keep growing the community. I love introducing like gamification and competitions, building bridges with other communities. I think is going to be super important. And I'm all about that. So lots of fun to come. And it's just been such a fun week so far getting situated here, at Trust Machines and Leather. Brandon, you've been so welcoming. So just thank you so much. And everyone else on the team too, not just Brandon.
Thank you. Well, sign me up for being very interested in Leather Mobile Beta. I'm sure everybody in the audience is very eager to hear more about that. And we will definitely be sharing more soon, but that's definitely a good preview and can't wait to be able to share more on that. And yeah, I mean, we have definitely been doing a lot in the community already with Leather. Obviously, having Sean here as our community advocate, we've posted a lot about how we are constantly just in the trenches, showing up for the community, joining people's spaces, joining the Welsh spaces, doing all these different things. And I'm just excited that we can continue to double down on that and have a dedicated, person that is just dedicated full time to growing Leather community. And I just can't wait to see what you do. So we're really excited. And maybe that is a good segue, Sean, to talk a little bit about your Leather Lounge from yesterday, talking a little bit about the DMT community.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a relatively new concept. This came about after the Ordinals wave for sure. So Annie and I worked together on making videos, mostly that are released on our YouTube. And I was doing a lot of research on DMT because I first heard about them on I think it was episode 7 of the Leather Lounge, when we had Jack Ben Switch and Ian Banksia on to talk about their DMT-inspired mint called Stacks Invaders. And so that was on the Stacks ecosystem. And I was doing more and more research, trying to figure out, trying to really grasp DMT so that I could then write about it and kind of distill it in a way that is easier for non-coders like myself to understand. And when I was just getting into the weeds, I discovered Will, really one of the founders of DMT. Found his podcast, the Block Runner podcast, and I was shooting him some messages, just asking for clarification. And I thought, I think this deserves its own show, a dedicated show for the Leather Lounge. So I invited him on last week. He also hooked me up with Evie, the creator of Nat Cats. So yesterday's discussion was, it had the potential of being like incredibly in the weeds and hard to understand. But I'm hoping that that we guided the conversation in a way that was kind of easy for people to grasp, even if they hadn't heard of DMT, which is digital matter theory, before. Kabi and anyone else listening, if you were at the show yesterday, just give me a thumbs up if you thought like you learned something new about, digital matter theory. But I'll give you just a quick synopsis. But so DMT, digital matter theory, is a framework for understanding that there are these inherent, naturally existing patterns that happen in Bitcoin's raw data. I think we probably have all heard of like generative art that pulls information from, for example, like the block height. You can take the last four numbers of the block and use that to determine some characteristics of an asset. Okay, maybe it's like a color, a shape, some features, some characteristics. But if you take that one step further, there are these patterns that can emerge, and some patterns occur less than others. So they have like a scarcity element. So you can also tie something like a collection's total mint supply to some naturally occurring pattern. So it was a super fascinating conversation. We'll definitely be sharing out some of the highlights and making that available as a podcast, which is a good transition to swing it back to you.
Yeah, I think, well, before we get to that, I think we had a conversation, I think, about this last week. And I, to be honest, still don't entirely understand the differences between DMT and just using certain recursive elements that are already existing in Ordinals to do some of these things. And to elaborate on that, so for some of these DMT collections that are out there, if I pull up these DMT collections on ordinals.com, I don't actually see art. I see some JSON data. And that's not very compelling to me, because then, if I'm not seeing it on like the native sort of Ordinals protocol and I'm having to rely on another, sub protocol, I guess, to render the data properly, to me, that's just not as compelling. But it feels like a lot of what DMT is trying to do can be done using things like recursion, because you do have, when you think of recursion on Ordinals, you think of the ability to sort of pull in one inscription into another, right? But recursion also references the ability to look at certain data, like block data, and other elements. You mentioned like the generative art, right? Folks like Billy Resty and a lot of the folks that are creating this generative art is using that kind of recursive data, looking at like the block data or the SAT number or different pieces of data like that to render the art. So I think for me, I'm still wrapping my head around what are the benefits of DMT versus, I guess, just generative art, when it doesn't feel like it's, I guess, fully native to Ordinals, because I can't see the art all the time natively on like ordinals.com.
Yeah, to your point, I remember thinking about this because early on in my Ordinals journey, which is, I know this is something else that we're going to touch on later in the show, I was most excited about that with sharing my photography, right? So to me, it was like pretty simple. I just try to get a JPEG as small as I can, which was pretty sacrificial, right? Just to take the low quality. But you inscribe it and it just shows up natively, right? It's a JPEG. But people are doing so much more with relying on platforms or even wallets to render these recursive pieces so that we can view them. So I know we're in Leather is in talks with Will on how to make those viewable within Leather Wallet. So instead of just seeing a JSON file code, we'll see the art.
Yeah, I hope to see it natively in Leather, but I feel like, I just feel like I wish that it adopted the Ordinals standard fully, in that it was just native, right? And I wasn't just looking at code. I want to see the art, and I don't want to use other things to do it. I just want it to work. So yeah. I'm sure that there are great reasons why that they did it in this way instead. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm thinking about it, at least for now.
Yeah. Well, we're not all Neo. We can't look at a screen of code and see people. So perhaps the one additional element is this idea that we can keep finding recurring patterns, and some of them have more rarity. So you can then tie, like for example, with Natcats, which is one of the projects that we talked about, there might be some more created, but like the likelihood is pretty low. So pulling out some of these patterns can help you determine a collection's scarcity and final number. So that aspect becomes non-arbitrary. Maybe that's one distinction.
Yeah. One thing that was also interesting, and maybe we should do a dedicated show on this in the future also, is track and like bitmap and that whole ecosystem. I think is very interesting, just in terms of kind of creating kind of scarcity on ordinals in a sense. Yeah, I just think that concept is very interesting. It'd be cool to explore that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's worth its own show. And DMT was inspired by bitmap, but we just briefly like went over it just for the context of DMT. So yeah, it was a good show. Definitely, you can't just like hear about it once and then have a full grasp on it. It's worth a follow up.
Yeah, I feel like ever since we did do that Leather Lounge originally with the Stacks Invaders, I feel like I've been hearing more and more and more about DMT. It feels like it's just becoming more and more of a thing. So really cool that you were kind of early on this. And we've since kind of seen just a little bit more traction with that. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, it is early. And as we ended the show with, like, there's a lot of development happening. The next 2 weeks are going to be very formative. So do stay tuned.
Yeah. Well, so how's this for a segue? So just talking about previous episodes of Leather Lounge, talking about an older episode of talking about Stacks Invaders. Speaking of that, well, we're still actually working on, I guess, getting Good for Bitcoin on there. That should be up in a day or two. But we have Good for Bitcoin, or Leather Lounge we're working on. Good for Bitcoin is now live on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, which is very exciting. So for folks that, are not able to join live, which we already talked about, time zones makes total sense. For people that can't join, maybe they have conflicts, you can still listen back. And I just think it's really exciting because, especially for a show like this, right, where we're talking every week about Bitcoin news, it's kind of nice to be able to just listen to something like this, maybe over the weekend, maybe skip silence and listen to it on 1.2 speed or something like that, just to get through all the news that's happening over the week. I think it's just really cool that we can offer this, on a podcast platform, and episodes are all live now. So go stop what you're doing and subscribe. We're on Spotify and Amazon. I think we're everywhere. I think we're on Amazon and Apple, and we did all the syndication. So you should be able to hopefully find us.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a better UX just listening in your native podcast. So yeah, we're excited to take that next step.
Yeah, we're expanding. So that's maybe the theme of this week is expansion. But we have a lot of news to talk about this week, and I think probably one of the bigger news, it's maybe more of a niche topic, like just within our little Ordinals ecosystem here, but was this controversy between Rock Toshi and Casey. And to sort of talk about, so the timeline of events this week was, what was it? It was on Tuesday, I believe. Rock Toshi came out and basically was like, I was a co-founder of Ordinals, and I've never said it publicly, and nobody else really has, but it's true. And he kind of expanded on that a little bit. And a lot of people in the replies that I trust were corroborating this and being like, yep, I was there. He was totally around during this time, and a lot of people were confirming it. And I was inclined to just take him for his word, right? But yesterday, Casey came out with his version of the story, basically saying, nope, he was not. He did not co-found Ordinals. He did not contribute code outside of like a bug, a typo fix, I think, in like the Ord GitHub, and basically just pretty much denied his involvement. So, I mean, I think I am inclined to trust Casey. I don't think he has much of a reason to to lie about this type of stuff. And then a lot of other people have also piled on in support of Casey. So that, it's just for those that I guess haven't keeping track, that's just a very quick recap of sort of the drama that's been going on in the Ordinals community this week. But Sean, I'm curious how, have you been following the drama at all, and how it's sort of connected with you?
Yes, I've been following it as much as I can without it like impacting kind of deliverables, right? Like things that I really should be doing. So try not to get scooped up in the drama, but this feels, it's in our wheelhouse. And I do remember in January seeing tweets about Raktoshi harassing people, seeing tweets from CB Spears, Aaron, Trevor, in addition to Casey. Maybe we'll get some threatening messages now that we're talking about it. But I mean, to no surprise, Casey has been responsible for so much. And it's common knowledge, as much as possible, everything is out in the open. And that's why transparency and reputation is everything. And if anyone tries to, like, you can try to lie, but we're in an ecosystem that values transparency and reputation. So it's starting to come out. This is the back and forth, right? This is the result of free speech. You can say anything you want, but so can everyone else. And we can corroborate with other information, sources of information, and perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, Casey has obviously contributed so much to Bitcoin culture in this past year and a half. Launching Ordinals, launching Runes, and he, very, very importantly, he didn't do any of these things as a cash grab, right? He launched Ordinals as this just open source protocol. He created Ordinal 0, but then he didn't really inscribe anything else for like the longest time. He created runes, but he didn't, pre-mine any runes for himself, or a lot of the actions that he's taken with these protocols have been in the name of decentralization and, like you said, transparency and trust. So when you look at somebody like Raktoshi, who, I mean, no argument, he was very early to Ordinals, right? He inscribed the Bitcoin rocks, which are very, very early, or one of the earliest, I think, if not the earliest, Ordinals collection out there. So he was very, very early into Ordinals. He also, he's been under a lot of pseudonyms, so a lot of people pretty much speculate at this point that he is the creator of NodeMonks and created potentially some other collections as well. NodeMonks is probably the most, I think, agreed upon, that he was part of that. So, there was some controversy with NodeMonks, right? We actually just wrote about it recently in a blog post, and we did a thread about it with the launch of NodeMonks. Originally, it was going to be sort of like a free mint, and then it changed to like a Dutch auction, and a lot of people got really angry at that, that it was sort of a cash grab. So, it's look at kind of what they do, not what they say, right? A lot of his actions have, been in pretty big contrast to Casey's actions in terms of distributing everything very fairly and for free. And it's interesting or important, I guess, to note that. In addition to what you said, which is very important, which is that there are specific examples and very trusted people in the ordinal space that have come out to talk about Raktoshi specifically harassing them in the space. So, and very trusted people like you mentioned, like Charlie Spears and Aaron from Ordinals.org and Trevor and all these very important people in the ordinal space. So yeah, that's also very important to call out.
Yeah, true. But it is. I think the news is shaking out. So I woke up this morning to a bunch of people saying like, I am the founder of this. I am the founder of this. I'm going, what's going on here? And then I realized that this was at the heart of it. But one of my favorite tweets today was from Bruffstar, the founder of Ordinalsbot. And he said, I'm just going to come out and say it. I invented Cardano. So people have been getting a lot of leverage on this one.
It definitely is making for a good meme. Like yeah, I was a co-founder of blank. I've never said that publicly, and to my knowledge, nobody else has either. But it's true. That's a meme right there. And I definitely can give credit to Raktoshi for just being a very viral person. Like this is not, he clearly knows how to go viral. For better or for worse, I guess. Maybe it can be for controversial reasons, but yeah, it's pretty funny that people are kind of rolling with it.
Yeah, true. So you are a master, at Twitter apparently. So two things, but just to segue, you got that great shout out from Mempool at just being a wizard with leather. So shout out to you for that, well deserved. But also, you are an expert like digger. So you did some deep digging on X and found some tweets from some of us from the early days of Ordinals. You want to tell us about that while I pin these?
Yeah. So I want to give a shout out to Bob Bodley, who is, if you're not following Bob, he is a very prolific thread writer and Bitcoin researcher and just a really good person to follow in the space. And he tweeted at the beginning of this week a question, which was, when was your Ordinals day? And what he is defining as his Ordinals day is sort of, when was the first time that you tweeted about Ordinals? Because like we just talked about in our last story, right? Everything is public. You can go back and you can search on the timeline and you can see when was the first time that you talked about Ordinals? Like, how early were you? So yeah, I did a little bit of digging to look at both when I tweeted and you first tweeted about Ordinals, and it was quite early. So do you want to read off your your tweet, I guess, which was on February 8th of 2023?
All right, yeah, I'll read that off. So I said, watching everyone scramble to Ordinals is fantastic. February is off to a banging start. Rocket emoji.
So maybe you could expand on that a little bit. I feel like based on this tweet, you were already familiar with Ordinals and had already been sort of watching it. So I'm curious if you remember maybe a little bit more context on why you mentioned that and kind of what your very early introduction to Ordinals was during this time.
Sure. So I have, it was in one of my Discord groups, and my buddy Anibal, who's a great friend, insane brain, so smart, and collaborator. We worked together on a couple collections. One of them is NFTs for Peace. And he messaged in this group, what do you guys think about Ordinals? And I said, what's Ordinals? And he sent me the video to the Hell Money podcast where they were talking about it. And that was the start. And then I started watching all of these people that I knew from the Stacks community transition super fast, because this concept of building on Bitcoin, like, that was just native to Stacks people, like very flexible mentally. And so I saw them transitioning quickly. So it was just super engaging, which is a good transition to your tweet about the mental gymnastics.
Yeah. So by this time, I was already pretty well. Maybe I wasn't deep into Ordinals because I actually didn't own any inscriptions or like start sort of participating directly in Ordinals for a while. Unfortunately, I guess like I could have been early, but I just wasn't for some dumb reason.
Were you early enough to get runestones airdropped to you.
Yes.
That's friend. That's early.
Well, so yes, I agree. We're all still early to ordinals, I think, even if you're getting in now. But for some additional context, maybe before we get to my tweet, let me talk about sort of the journey with posting about it on Trust Machines. So a lot of people, I feel like, including myself, learned about ordinals from a blog post from Porto, from Dennis Porto, and it was talking about it was talking about arbitrary data on Bitcoin, and it talked a little bit about the history of that. This, of course, this is not the first time that we've seen arbitrary data on Bitcoin with ordinals, but it really was an introduction to ordinals for a lot of folks. And I actually saw that based on Dan Held, who was a marketing advisor at Trust Machines, actually shared the blog post with me. And that was how I originally learned about it. So shout out to Dan. And I, read, Porto's post about it and did a little bit more digging, and then wrote a thread of my own on Trust Machines. And at the time, for Trust Machines, going way back, over a year ago, we didn't really have a lot of products in market yet. We didn't have Leather. The Hero Wallet was still Hero Wallet, and it was Hero, and it was a separate thing. It wasn't part of Trust Machines. And so we didn't have a lot of products in market yet. So at the time, we were very focused on creating a lot of educational content and doing like daily Twitter threads on what is the latest and greatest that's going on in Bitcoin and what is all the new things that are happening. So one of these things was Ordinals. And I wrote a thread about Ordinals, and I posted it on January 30th, which is quite early. And it's really funny. There's a specific tweet in here. I'm going to find it, and I'm just going to read it word for word. Also of note, the place where these inscriptions transaction data is stored receives a discount compared to more normal Bitcoin transactions. These issues are still relatively minor, though. As of this writing, there's less than 350 total inscriptions on ordinals.com.
Wow, that was a very early post. Wow. So
yeah, I mean, we've been following inscriptions since the beginning. So that was on January 30th. So depending on how you look at it, maybe January 30th is my ordinals day. But I posted. Well, actually, I guess I posted on my own personal account on the same day. So it started to pick up, started to see a little bit more commentary there, and yeah. So I'll read my tweet. So it says, the mental gymnastics some Bitcoiners are doing in response to Bitcoin ordinals / inscriptions is a sight to behold. Calling for the censorship of these transactions is the complete antithesis of the philosophy of Bitcoin: permissionless, immutable, decentralized. And I got to pat myself on the back for that. Honestly, I think that's a great tweet.
For sure, man. You really summed it up in less than 280 characters.
Yeah. You also had a hot take follow up with that, Brandon. I was curious. You say, being against inscriptions is you acknowledging that there's a critical bug in Bitcoin's code. So can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
I think, I don't know if actually that tweet holds up quite as well as the first one, but a lot of people were saying that these were like illegitimate transactions, right? And in order for them to be illegitimate transactions, that would mean that there needs to be a flaw in Bitcoin's code or an exploit, that people are taking advantage of in Bitcoin's code. So I think that was sort of why I mentioned that. Obviously, there, when you're inscribing something, you're paying fees. Miners are accepting it. It's a valid Bitcoin transaction. But especially in the early days, a lot of people were saying that these were not valid Bitcoin transactions, which is just not the case, right? They're on the blockchain. They're valid. So it was, sort of in response to that.
Yeah, totally. I think there's sort of like a cohort of like there's an opinion out there that like NFTs on Bitcoin are maybe not what the original design was for because it wasn't really talked about. But I think it just, it really goes to show like how much more flexible and how much more you can actually do on Bitcoin. And that I feel like that just keeps getting more discovered. time after time. And, we saw that with DMTs. Like it's such a cool thing that we talked about yesterday. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I've listened to Casey talk about this a lot as well, especially when people were in early days of Ordinals, they were saying that, oh, this is an unintended consequence, or this is nobody could have seen this coming, right? And you in fact could have seen this coming by just looking at a lot of the BIPs that were related to Taproot and SegWit, which are kind of the two big BIPs that enabled inscriptions to exist. And literally in the BIP proposal for Taproot, it talks about the witness data and how you could technically what it does, right? It enables you to store a larger amount of witness data in transactions than you normally would be able to. And that is pretty obvious. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more obvious in hindsight, but it was right there, right? That you could suddenly now store larger amounts of data in the witness data of a transaction. So it was right there.
2 quick points on this. One, it speaks to the unintended consequences that changing Bitcoin can have, even if it doesn't happen immediately. It can take a while, but that's why it is so important. This debate of ossification versus innovation, right? I mean, it has to be slow to change. Innovation can happen off chain, on layers, etc. But yeah, slow to change. And Anita Posh, the consequence of this is that when BRC20 started going crazy and fees started spiking, and we were seeing 600 sats per VByte, 800, 1,000 was the peak, or something like that. The consequences for people who were using Bitcoin for kind of quote unquote real purposes, right? Like sending money as Bitcoin as money, right? It was impacting them. And Anita Posh was really vocal about this being a bad unintended consequence. So yeah, that was a hot debate and a result of this, but it's here to stay. And what can you do about it? It's here.
Yeah, I mean, we are at this point, we have many more than 350 inscriptions out there. If I pull up the Dune dashboard, we have 69,406 or 69,468,467 inscriptions to date.
Wow!
So we have grown so much in this time, and I don't know about you guys, but my nodes are still working. Despite holding all of this additional data, it didn't break Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's still here. And it doesn't seem like it really impacted too much in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it saved miners, though. My goodness, they've been doing well, getting all these fees. And that was actually a legitimate problem. Like, what happens after after blocks stop getting mined, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we definitely, that's the other flippening maybe that people aren't talking about as much currently, but was definitely something. With runes, we saw a big kind of flipping in transaction fees, but looking at kind of when transaction fees kind of offset the subsidy that people get or that miners get when they mine Bitcoin. That needs to happen in order for Bitcoin to continue to exist and to succeed, right? There needs to be incentive for miners. And yeah, this is a great way to do that.
Yeah, big relief.
Well, switching gears quite a bit here is not really related to Ordinals at all, but I want to talk about this. This was kind of in crypto news. This is probably one of the bigger stories this week. So I'll just read it out. So CFTC orders Uniswap to pay a $175,000 fine, and specifically to Uniswap Labs, which is the company behind Uniswap, for offering, quote, leveraged or margined retail commodity transactions in digital assets, which were deemed illegal under the Commodity Exchange Act. And I think it's just important to note that this is targeting a very specific part of what Uniswap offers. It wasn't targeting the entire DEX, right? It wasn't targeting the entire thing. It was specifically targeting these kind of leveraged or margined assets. So yeah, I guess there's a little bit of nuance here, but we've talked a lot about, right? Like watch what they do, not what they say. The enforcement actions continue, unfortunately, in the U.S. But interestingly, I'm not sure what it is kind of now, but following the announcement, the price of Uni, which is their native token, actually jumped up a little bit based on the news. So perhaps it was maybe not as bad as expected. But they're still they have an ongoing maybe investigation with the SEC, who gave them a Wells notice in April that we talked about a couple of months ago. So they're still kind of under close scrutiny, I guess, under the current administration. And it's unfortunate to see.
I'm just so glad that the CFTC and the SEC protects me and offers me so much clarity on this industry. Good for them.
Well, I think I think one note is I believe it was in this ruling. They did specifically mention Bitcoin and Ethereum as being under their jurisdiction. So, that's also a fight that is being had internally between the two. But thanks CFTC for saving me.
Yeah, right. And with Blockworks as well.
Yeah, that was the who I was pulling the story from, because they had kind of a good quote, which was CFTC officials alleged that the tokens were leveraged or margined commodity transactions that did not result in actual delivery within 28 days and therefore can be offered to non-eligible contract participants only on a board of trade that has been designated or registered by the CFTC as a contract market. Kind of more legalese, but basically it was talking about a little bit more of like specifically what on their platform was being sort of alleged as kind of violating those acts or those laws.
Wonderful. Well, last week we had some hacking news. What's in the bad for Bitcoin hacking column this week?
Yeah, I didn't want to like mention it in the text of the title of the thing or anything in case we got like flagged. so there was a news story this week, and I think this is actually I don't know if this is necessarily FUD. I feel like this is a potentially a legitimate concern, but we're seeing now specific warnings that North Korea is trying to hack into Bitcoin ETFs. Bitcoin ETFs are on chain, of course, right? That data that Bitcoin is being stored on chain, even though it's being sort of it's kind of like wrapped Bitcoin in a sense, right? When you buy a Bitcoin ETF, you're buying Bitcoin from a BlackRock or a Fidelity. They're holding that Bitcoin on your behalf on chain, and they're giving you like an IOU that in the form of an ETF. But that Bitcoin is still on chain, and we're seeing now this warning that came out from the FBI, basically as sort of like a heads up or like an FYI, saying that North Korea is actually targeting U.S. Bitcoin ETFs to try to steal funds, and they're doing this from all sorts of different hacking strategies, social hacking. But it's a legitimate concern, right? There's this really large entity that is holding a really large amount of Bitcoin. So it's a huge target for these bad actors. And it's Coinbase custody versus North Korea, I guess.
Yeah, that's like such a massive responsibility. Like managing my own private keys is almost too much at times, right? Like the responsibility there is insane. So yeah, and because of the way lack of regulation, lack of clarity has been over the past few years, It's just meant that like Coinbase is kind of the go-to solution for a lot of these ETFs and holders. So it would be good to be more decentralized in that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to create too much FUD, but I was trying to think of like what would actually happen if they were somehow successful, right? And looking at the ETF landscape, there's almost 1 million Bitcoin held in ETFs, which is nearly 52 which is $52.5 billion. So again, a huge target. If something were to somehow happen, obviously the price of Bitcoin would tank. Like it would be disastrous, and create so much fear and so much uncertainty in the market. It would just be a complete catastrophic event. And like if that situation happened, it would tank the market. It would be devastating. But I was also just trying to think of like what would happen to the people that were holding the ETFs. Like they don't have FDIC insurance, or like I'm not really sure, I guess, what the recourse would be if one of these custodians. There has to be some sort of insurance. I don't know what it is. With what would happen? What sort of guarantee do holders of these ETFs have if something were to happen to the Bitcoin that is being custodied by these custodians? I don't know.
Well, I know what happened with Celsius and others. So let me ask you this. So I have this question: if hackers were successful and got some Bitcoin from these ETFs, is it possible that we might not know? Like, I would assume that we have enough like on-chain analysts and sleuths to know if that happened. But if it's possible, like that might happen, and we just might not be told about it. And it's just this. I have a question of like transparency, right? How can we confirm that it's 1-to-1? If I buy a Bitcoin in my ETF, how can I confirm that the ETF on my behalf is buying the actual Bitcoin and holding it, right? How do we know it's 1-to-1?
Well, I don't think every ETF provider is doing it. I don't think BlackRock is doing it, but some are. The Bitwise ETF publishes an address where you can just go on there and you can see how much Bitcoin they're holding. So nice. I don't think you can specifically match it up to, are they holding my Bitcoin if you own, their ETF, but you can at least see how much Bitcoin they have. And you can see, it fluctuating, right? And going in and out every day, or however, often that they rebalance. So not every provider does offer that, but certain ones do.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing that people do need to be aware of, is favoring those platforms that are transparent.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's not financial advice, not an endorsement. I personally, I used to own some GBTC back in the day when that was the only option in like a Roth IRA. And when these ETFs launched, I ended up flipping it over to the Bitwise one because they offered kind of that transparency, which I appreciated. And they also supported Bitcoin development as well. So that's just what I personally did. So I think, just in general, right, that aligns pretty well with Bitcoiner views, is, to have transparency and trust there. So you don't have to trust, you can verify.
That's right. Well, good for you for voting.
Yeah. And generally, I think like any kind of on-ramp to Bitcoin is a good thing. But for me, this is just like another reminder to double check my self-custody practice and make sure my ducks are in a row.
I agree. I think that's actually something that I was thinking about this week as well. I was listening to Jameson Lopp, who is a really fantastic expert kind of on this subject of self-custody and custodying your Bitcoin correctly. And I think there's definitely levels, of course, that of safety and of custody that you can take, whether that's in a hot wallet or a cold wallet through something like a ledger or a cold card or through multi-sig. And there's a lot of different, ways that you can custody Bitcoin. And they each of them have their pros and cons. So yeah, I've been thinking about that this week actually. And yeah, I feel like we should maybe expand on that a little bit more. Maybe we can do like a dedicated like custody show on that or something in the future, because it's certainly very, very important information, especially for newer people that are getting into the space, on how do I make sure that I'm custodying my assets properly, and what are the risks with keeping everything in one wallet versus splitting it up, and holding my keys. And there's a lot of things to talk about there. I think it'd be a good subject.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like you can't go over it enough. Like the more reminders you have, it's just the stickier it gets in your brain. So I love it. Absolutely.
Well, Sean, I wanted to ask you about this one as our resident non-US. Well, I guess Kate is non-US as well, but being across the pond. So I saw this news, which is pretty cool, which is that Mastercard introduces non-custodial Bitcoin debit card. So Mastercard is getting into the race, and very interesting that it is a non-custodial option. I don't know if you're very familiar with this company, Mercurio. Or if you've looked into this a little bit more, since you're a little bit closer to it and potentially eligible to try something like this out. But really cool potential offering for people in the EU.
I haven't even heard of it yet, but out where I live, like no one knows about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So, but what this is good for is it gets it on people's radar. I'm curious. I'm gonna look into it. Mercurio. I like the name.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think anything like this. Well, I guess it does with Coinbase kind of offers something slightly similar, but pretty interesting to see Mastercard getting behind this themselves versus it just being like another kind of random smaller card provider. So Mastercard kind of putting their weight behind behind Bitcoin. And it's not just Bitcoin. I think it's other crypto as well. And essentially how it works is, you can use it anywhere that you can use a MasterCard. And they charge just like some fees when you're swiping your card that are, paying for that kind of conversion fee for converting from Bitcoin to euros. I think it's like a 1% fee or a 0.95% fee. And like a couple other kind of random fees on top of it, credit cards. Am I right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, still a very cool thing. It does raise the point though on, do you want to spend your Bitcoin in that way, right? Do you want to spend your crypto in that way, and incur things like, financial gains tax and, all the things that typically come with spending your Bitcoin. I don't know what the laws are, if it varies, from country to country over there, Sean, or I would imagine it's pretty similar in terms of, you spend your Bitcoin, you got to pay taxes on it.
I think that's the safest thing that you can assume, as if you sell it to buy a $3 espresso, I mean, that's you're realizing gains, right? So, but I can see the appeal of it, because for many Americans who are now living in Europe and not earning euros, right? You have to convert your US dollars to euros. Now the thing is, like, when you do it with a bank, the fees are crazy, right? And then they set you look up your own rates, right? You're like, okay, the rate is this. And then you look up the rate that they determined that they were going to use, and it's higher. And then they give you a fee. And so, I mean, for anyone moving substantial amounts of money over, you just have to ask yourself, like, is it worth my time to like track down and figure out like what the rate is that I'm going to get? Or is a card like this, you're kind of subject to whatever their rate is. They're choosing the price of Bitcoin to transfer into euros, right? And then they got the fees too. So you really, with all that stuff, you just got to get into the weeds and understand the details. But I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. It's good for Bitcoin.
Yeah. I don't know how much I would personally want to use it. I've even just been kind of reflecting on this year, with ordinals being a thing, and runes being a thing. I feel like I've spent more Bitcoin this year than any other year, and I'm a little scared. When all is said and done, come tax time, how much I'm going to owe on all my Bitcoin sales, technically, that I've made this year. It's a little scary, but that's a next year problem, I guess.
It is. It's a good conversation. I mean, for people who defer their taxes, that could be a good upcoming show, because you have until October, right? If you defer your taxes, so maybe that's worth a show.
That could actually be worth a show. We're coming up with all these great ideas, so that's pretty cool. Well, I feel like that was the last big thing that we wanted to talk about this week, and we are right at the 1 hour. So, how's that for timing?
The show right there.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining in. Just to read off a couple of comments here, we have Matei saying hello everybody. Shout out Matei. We have RTF saying, I think you guys nailed it regarding trust. Beautiful thing about Bitcoin: couples trust and verification. When reputation is everything, it's pretty easy to show instead of tell. When talk is cheap, producing a product or providing proof of work/action means everything. And then we also have Shaylee saying, I always get the hot Bitcoin community gossip from this show. So thank you, everybody, for participating, for commenting, and for listening in today. Again, we do this show live here on X every Friday, and we will see you next week, both for Leather Lounge on Thursday and Good for Bitcoin. And I'm just now remembering that we have a special episode that is coming out, I believe, on Tuesday, where we're going to be talking about BNS V2, which is coming very, very soon. We're going to hear from a lot of the folks that are building BNS V2, and the rollout is going to start happening next week, before Nakamoto, which is so exciting. I know a lot of folks in the Stacks community have been very, very eagerly awaiting. So stay tuned to Trust Machines. We posted a thread yesterday talking about that rollout a little bit more, and we will see you next week on all of those shows. So have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We record Good for Bitcoin live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on X. Please follow us at Trust Machines Co. if you would like to listen and engage with us live. Visit us at trustmachines.co for all the latest Bitcoin news. We'll see you next week.